Hello, I'm John Havens, and I'm honored to be able to send on a brief video for the Digital Innovation in Mental Health Conference. And I want to say a huge thank you to Becky Inkster for all the amazing work that she's been doing with regards to COVID and mental health. IEEE is the world's largest technology association, or technical professional association, I should say. And I'm honored to work there. I lead a large program on artificial intelligence and ethics. There, I should say today, I'm speaking as John. IEEE is a big organization, so the work I lead I can speak to, but I'm not speaking for all of IEEE. And secondly, also, I am not a professional mental health practitioner, so I'm speaking about mental health as a passionate advocate for positive mental health versus someone from the profession, a doctor, etc. So today, I wanted to talk about what it means to count in regards to mental health. And I'll talk about two main areas with regards to digital issues that I can speak to with some expertise. In terms of my background, I've written 3 books. The last one was called Artificial Intelligence, and it was about looking for a code of ethics for AI, but really understanding how our values as humans, along with the values of things like taking care of the environment, need to be factored into or counted in terms of how we build these amazing technologies. The book before that was called Hacking Happiness, had a lot of specifics about what I think you'll be talking about at the conference in terms of things like quantified self, analyzing physiological data, or things like sleep, or things like dating, and really being self-aware in ways that oftentimes we aren't, because you are trying to quantify aspects of yourself. And in that work, I met a wonderful guy who was studying his own values, and that led me to also formally be fascinated with studying values, which is something that is done in artificial intelligence work, or more specifically in design areas like human-computer interface areas with things like human-robot interaction, so HCI or HRI. And a lot of times what people don't realize is whether it's an algorithm or something like a robot, which is an external manifestation of the technology within the Android or physical device, ethics. Machines themselves don't have ethics. My phone doesn't have ethics. It's the people that produce them and the way that they produce them and share them, and then the way that people interpret those things. That is where ethics and values come into play. However, data scientists, roboticists will oftentimes use the phrase value alignment or values alignment. And really there, I'll go back to this idea of counting. Right? What is it we are trying to count about ourselves or take a measure of with regards to then why are we building these amazing, beautiful technologies? So let me talk about data first, and then I'm going to talk about indicators, actual well-being indicators, and that'll be my talk. In terms of data, 2 books ago, personal data, a lot of times people get focused on privacy, which is an important, obviously, area to talk about. But things like GDPR in the EU or aspects of the states, the ways that a person's data is protected through the government or through companies, that needs to happen, obviously, right? But these are externals, as it were, forces taking care of us, or that's the hope. As people, we are hoping that our data is protected. But what we know is not just through cybersecurity attacks, etc., or bad actors who are trying to steal our data for purposes to manipulate. There's a lack of clarity in terms of fully understanding how people are accessing our data, and that is messing with or harming aspects of our agency in terms of the digital world. And that means right now, today, algorithms that in one sense represent my identity are out and about, and I don't know who's accessing them and why. We're also entering into a time that a lot of times, and I hope my guess is you'll talk about in this arena, because the mental health arena is pretty far advanced in areas of immersive reality, which include augmented And virtual reality, I know there's some amazing work being done, say, with empathy in terms of how people can put on a virtual reality headset and experience life, say, as a child if they're an adult, or as a woman if they're a man, or as a person of color if they're white. These are amazing tools to really help you live a sense of how that person feels like they count or not, right? And I'm obviously working this metaphor, but the point here is that immersive reality and our data, more and more we're going to realize how precious our data is in terms of how it represents our identity, especially in the immersive realms that more and more all of us are going to be living in. We're getting used to it now with COVID on Skype calls and whatever else. And I don't think people really think it's an immersive reality, right? They just think, well, I'm just on Skype a lot. But we're training ourselves, right, to not just be using our devices all the time, but to be looking at screens and sort of living a good portion of our lives immersed in an environment that's not our physical, quote, true or real reality. And that word real obviously is very subjective, and someone could say, well, my reality is more real inside of a Second Life gaming environment because I can represent myself in an avatar that shows who I really am. And that's their truth, and that's awesome. But in terms of counting with data, when we are tracked from the outside in, we can't access data, not even really own it, right? Data ownership's a very different discussion, but accessing data means I know all the different people who are talking about John, me, and I kind of know what they're talking about, and I can kind of understand it. What we need to move towards with regards to the digital and immersive arena in general is what's called data sovereignty. And forgive me if people are talking about this. That's awesome. I hope they do. Data sovereignty comes in a lot of different sizes, and I'm not here to advocate for one specific integration of the technology or the methodologies to get there. Writ large, a lot of our work is focused on giving an individual a sense of their data as it represents their identity, and realizing that in the same way, say like with your money, everyone gets that money has a certain worth, but it does different things if you give it to your doctor, right? It goes farther or not as far. It does different things if you use it to buy something at a store. But my whole point here is that people kind of understand that money has not different identities, but it is used in multiple environments where it's still your money, right? We haven't gotten to the point where we've been able to tell the general public whether we're patients or people buying things or citizens, meaning I wear different hats. Sometimes I'm a patient, sometimes I vote and I'm a citizen, sometimes I buy things and I'm a customer. Nonetheless, the data that is about me, I am the unique individual on the planet that is pushing out this data. And that means that when there are insights generated about me, not only should I have the ability to know what those are from a potentially fiscal standpoint, meaning could I be reimbursed where aspects of my data are given to, say, an advertiser and that helps them improve their business. Well, should I get paid? I think so. But right now there's this sort of mistaken sense that those interactions, if they happened, would be on an equal footing or parity for me, where they wouldn't, because I don't have a way right now to access my data. And so everyone accessing my data that's asking, hey, can I buy some of your data? It's an uneven partnership. It's not a partnership at all. So data sovereignty simply means there's sort of a way that I know, well, this is John's data. And then through blockchain or smart contracts or any of these wonderful tools that we have now where I can share my data directly just with one other party, trust then starts to happen with a sense of parity. Parity meaning we can become equals with myself and who I'm sharing the data with. Doesn't mean that I won't get tracked, and it doesn't mean that the sort of terms and conditions, the digital terms and conditions that I offer back to the world will always be honored. But the logic is I'd at least have a shot. So data sovereignty is the first way that people need to be counted now in 2020. And for mental health, it means they also have, and I'm not going to speak for everyone, mental health is such a broad term, obviously. But the point being that whether it's a person or their caregiver, there'd be much more ability to recognize who we are and our identity in all these different realms. And we'd have an agency in the sense of saying, well, I know that I'm John because when I access my data and share it, this is how I choose to share it. And right now, those tools don't exist for all people, and they need to. And there's a lot of wonderful examples of insurance companies, medical companies, individuals using these tools already. For instance, I worked with a company called Glimpse, Glimpse, that had this ability for people to have their data be accessed. They could see it as a patient and then share it in ways that they chose. And they had portability for their data. So there's models for this, is my point. So data sovereignty is something that we really need to focus on for all people. And mental health, again, I'm not a professional in the space. So when I say mental health, I mean a sense of I get to know who I am and have parity with my data. That's one way to be counted. The second critical way to be counted is through well-being indicators. And most people know these in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. If you're familiar with Bhutan's gross national happiness, you may know these. And what I want to focus on here is New Zealand. New Zealand has been doing amazing work with regards to what they call their well-being economy. And you can actually see for 2019, they had 5 areas that they focused on where their economy, that's how they split up the revenue for their economy or their funding. And one of the areas was children's mental health. What that basically means is GDP, gross domestic product, which we're all familiar with. A lot of people don't think about it, but I think about it all the time. And the point is that back 70 or 80 years ago, a bunch of people in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, basically said, after the Second World War, here's what we're going to count. And not just count like we're going to count using these statistical measurements, which are largely financial, focused on exponential growth. But also we're going to decide, in one sense, what not to count. And it's not like they consciously said, let's not count these things. But they didn't. They didn't include, for instance, the environment, where an oil tanker spilling means the GDP goes up because more jobs take place or given. But then the ecosystem, the damage to the ecosystem is not factored into those financial metrics or statistical metrics. It's not that it's evil. It's just that on its own, it's very myopic and it won't help the environment in that instance. The other thing it doesn't measure, it wasn't built to measure, is caregiving. And in terms of counting, for people to count, especially the caregivers, we must have what's called GDP and beyond metrics. It doesn't mean we throw away GDP. It's just that we fundamentally recognize as a society what's called the triple bottom line, right? People, planet, and profit. And for the work that I'm helping to drive, we have a well-being chapter of this book called Ethically Aligned Design. It's free. It's Creative Commons. And then we've also created a standard. IEEE created the Wi-Fi standard. So standards are very powerful instruments of communication because people come together and via consensus create these documents, which then can be used. They are not formally policy, but they can be used by policymakers. And in the case of what's called IEEE 7010-2020, we just number things. It's focused on well-being indicators, and it's not saying, hey, reader, you have to use this particular well-being indicator when you build your artificial intelligence systems. It's saying, hey, reader, people that are working so hard to keep people safe and build these amazing tools, are you aware of, for instance, the social progress indicator? Or are you aware of the Happy Planet Index, which has the data that you need in terms of building your systems, machine learning, etc.? But also it frames what you're building as a tool that is not only going to do what you are building it to do, but it's going to influence the users in ways that maybe you hadn't thought about. And you have to know what counts for them. And you have to know what counts for the planet. And the logic here is that with 7010, if we can have people understand that when they build these amazing tools, they can see these indicators they didn't even know existed before, but build as a metric of success for anything we build, the increase of longitudinal human flourishing for all, holistically, right? And that's on top of making sure they have enough food and water. In symbiosis with the increase of environmental flourishing, then that's also where mental health gets really prioritized, because the people part of what we build is prioritized above just, say, exponential growth alone in isolation. So I know I'm at 15 minutes, so I just want to wrap up and say again, thank you to Becky and to all of you for the amazing work that you're doing. In this era of COVID, mental health has become such, a much more important, recognized aspect of who we are as people. And that as much as we may want to, for whatever reason, focus on other things, knowing how we count and our loved ones count and how our neighbors count, both in our community and around the world, treasuring them and counting them and their data. That is how to build these tools in ways to better guarantee that they really do increase human flourishing and the environment at the same time. So hope you have a wonderful conference. Thanks again. I'm John Havens. And if you want to know more about the work that I help drive, you can go to ethicsinaction.ieee.org. Thanks.